Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's an absolute pleasure to be here with you today. This session is called Animal Welfare and Innovation in Capture Fisheries. I'm absolutely thrilled to be moderating this session. My name is Sofika Kosteniuk. I'm the Managing Director at Aquatic Life Institute, and we really wanted to commend the World Fisheries Congress for offering this session. This is such a neglected issue and a critical issue that intersects with climate change, sustainability, poverty, hunger, and of course, life underwater. We have 6 fantastic experts that'll be presenting to you today. I'm very enthusiastic about learning from each one of them. The session lasts 1.5 hours, and it is a hybrid session, so we'll have 2 panelists joining us virtually today. Without further ado, I'll introduce the first speaker, who is Christine Zhu. She is with Aquatic Life Institute, and her talk is titled A New Way of Designing Fisheries Management to Support SDG 14, Life Underwater. Christine.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much, Sofika, and it's a pleasure to be here with you today. I work at Aquatic Life Institute as the head of strategic initiatives. We're an international NGO dedicated to improving aquatic animal welfare in both aquaculture and fisheries. Today, I'd like to talk to you about a new way of designing fisheries to support SDG 14, life below water. But first, why do we need a new way of managing fisheries? Well, there are 4 critical issues that I would like to explore. Problem number 1, insufficient and ineffective management of industrial fishing has played a large role in the decline of fish populations. As you see here, the FAO reports that 1/3 of all fish populations are overfished and that another 60% cannot sustain any more increases in fishing. Meanwhile, biodiversity is declining, with 33% of marine mammals, sharks, and other related species at the verge of extinction. Problem number 2, many forms of industrial fishing lead to indiscriminate fishing and ecosystem damage. You can see here some forms of industrial fishing. They're often related to some issues such as high bycatch, ghost fishing, and/or bottom seafloor damage. Around the world, there are more than 400,000 industrial fishing vessels that catch 72% of the world's aquatic animals. Meanwhile, around 30% of all seafood is caught illegally. So as the demand for fish consumption grows, so will the damage to aquatic animals and the marine ecosystem. Problem number 3, unlike farmed land animals, wild-caught fish is the last major food-producing sector that does not take animal welfare into consideration. They're caught in massive nets and are often dumped on deck and left to suffocate for hours. And because fish don't have vocal cords, they suffer in silence. But imagine a world in which fish did have a voice. What do you think you would hear on board a fishing vessel? Problem number 4, everyone, and I'm talking about fisheries management professionals and even staunch ocean conservationists, including myself, who just over 4 years ago wasn't thinking about this issue in this way, all refer to wild-caught fish as simply stock. In other words, raw resources to be exploited. They're also counted in tonnage rather than individual animals, which is in stark contrast to other food-producing sectors. And this is a problem because it distorts our perception of fish by reducing them to just food. It also diminishes their intrinsic value as living beings. In fact, as you see here, every year we kill 2 to 3 trillion aquatic animals in the wild for human consumption, which is 35 times higher than all farmed land animals combined. This equates to 6 million individual animals lost per minute. So at Aquatic Life Institute, what we focus on is developing aquaculture and fisheries with the main stakeholders in mind, and that's the individuals living below water. We advocate for a shift in how we view aquatic animals, not merely as seafood, but as individuals. We advocate for reducing the number of aquatic animals involved in the food system by shifting away from, for example, intensive aquaculture and industrial fishing, while refining the ways in which they are farmed, caught, handled, and killed. We advocate for legal protections for aquatic animals and incorporating aquatic animal welfare standards into fishing guidelines via, for example, welfare-minded fishing gear, scaling up humane stunning on board, and limiting the catch of non-target species. We advocate for global seafood certifications like the MSC to incorporate aquatic animal welfare into their standards. And lastly, of course, we need more research and pilot projects to offer real-world practical solutions to the fishing industry. Only this way can we ensure the long-term viability of fish populations and support life below water. Here are all of the welfare risks in capture fisheries. And in fact, it's an image adapted from the amazing work of our fellow panelist, Mike Bring. So what we need here are fisheries management policies that are designed to minimize these animal welfare risks in the capture process. For example, during capture, some of these improvements include reducing the fishing time, reducing the hull size, using non-injurious gear material, and improving selectivity to reduce bycatch at the source. Here's an example of using non-injurious material to improve fish quality and survival, and potentially also higher selectivity. This modular harvesting system was developed by a New Zealand-based company called Precision Seafood Harvesting, which uses a membrane-like fabric tube that replaces the traditional cod end of a trawl. It reduces fish damage during trawling, haulback, and unloading. And it also has these escapement holes so that small and unwanted fish can escape unharmed and free from exhaustion. During the retrieval phase, what we can do to improve animal welfare is retrieving the fish slowly and carefully, pumping the fish on board rather than lifting them in big nets. And here are some examples. On the left, you can see some traditional ways of lifting the nets and hauling a trawl net on board. Whereas on the right, you see examples of pumps that exist in the market that can be used to pump the fish on board. During the onboard handling and live storage phase, what we can do is reduce the time that fish spend out of water, ban mutilation or any removal of animal body parts, and using species-appropriate spaces to store live animals. Here's an example from a Norwegian-based company called Seaflow of their onboard storage equipment. So ideally, the fish is brought on board by pumping and then transferred to tanks made for holding live fish with sufficient oxygen levels and space that's appropriate for that species. The last stage of the capture process is stunning and slaughter. Before slaughter, animals should be stunned unconscious, just like what we do for farmed land animals and many aquaculture settings. They should not be left to die by suffocating on deck, nor in salt baths, nor in ice slurries. In fact, humane stunning technology already exists today for the majority of species caught by commercial fishing vessels. And there are two types: electrical stunning and mechanical stunning. On the left, we have dry and semi-dry electrical stunning. In the middle, we have in-water electrical stunning. And on the right, we have mechanical stunning, including percussive and spiking. The key advantages to stunning the fish before slaughter includes not only improved animal welfare and ethical fishing, but also possibly improved crew safety, product quality, and longer shelf life. And because this topic is still so very novel, each year we attend various events to raise awareness and advocate for improved aquatic animal welfare standards. So after this Congress, my colleagues will attend the Boston Seafood Show, while in April, I'll be attending the Barcelona Seafood Expo. There, I'll be speaking on a panel about incorporating aquatic animal welfare data into seafood traceability. Sometimes we'll run webinars for interested stakeholders, just like this Aquatic Animal Welfare 101 webinar that we did for the corporate sector last year. And we're part of 3 advisory councils to the European Commission in terms of policy. That includes the Pelagic Advisory Council, the Long Distance Advisory Council, and the Aquaculture Advisory Council. And of course, we follow governments around the world on any policy reform related to aquaculture and fisheries. In November of each year, we're heavily involved with the UNFCCC Climate Change Conference, where we speak up for aquatic animals in the food systems and blue food discussions. So I will conclude here by saying that if you're a fisheries management professional or a fisheries scientist, and I know there are many here at this Congress, and truly aspire to safeguard fish populations and life below water, then I urge you to look at these issues through the lens of the individuals inhabiting the marine ecosystem. Thank you for your attention. If you'd like to support our mission, you can join our Global Aquatic Animal Alliance, and please email me for any more information.
Thank you so much, Christine. Fascinating, great visuals also to accompany the content to kind of help people understand what it is you're referring to. We have a few minutes for questions before we move on to the next speaker. So I'm wondering if anyone in the audience has anything that they'd like to ask Christine. If so, please, you can just stand up and probably speak loudly and she'll be able to hear you from the stage.
Hi, I'm Sean Morgan, and I have a background as an auditor, so work directly with industry. I'm just interested in what the understanding, probably it's diverse across different industry members that you speak with, but what are the biggest forms of pushback that you get?
Great question, and I'll just repeat that if someone didn't hear that. The question is, what is sort of the most common or the biggest form of pushback that we receive when we introduce this issue to industry contexts?
And if they don't see reason to adopt these technologies for return on their investment, then it's very difficult for them to buy into the technology. And what we respond to these challenges is by saying and encouraging scientists, and you'll hear more about that with the other panelists, is doing more research on how introducing these welfare practices can actually improve product quality and also longer shelf life. And in some cases, there has been a demonstration of selling at premium costs, so higher premium costs. So these are some of the reasons why some industry players have already jumped on this ship, not bandwagon, but this ship, and started cooperating with NGOs or doing their own pilot projects to see, what are some of the initial investment costs and how this would help their business in the long term in terms of their bottom line. And also, this, I think, staying ahead of the trend in terms of maybe consumer awareness and demand, and also any future policies that might be coming that might mandate more aquatic animal welfare related policies. So reducing business risks and also consumer risks.
Thank you so much. That's great. We will now move on to our second speaker, who's going to be joining us virtually. And the speaker is Vinesh Samel. He's with the Center of Marine Sciences of Algarve. And I believe that he will be loading, and here we go. Hello, Vignesh, we can see you.
Hi, am I audible?
Yes, you are. We can hear you as well. If you would like
Okay,
to share your
perfect. Could you
screen.
please enable screen sharing?
Has screen sharing been enabled? That's the request of the panelist.
Yes, because when I try to share my screen, screen, it says the host disabled participant screen sharing.
Are you able to see that now? Perhaps.
I'm afraid I'm not. It still says the same, the host disabled participant screen sharing.
Maybe we can share it for you, Vignesh.
Oh, that would be great.
Okay, please just let me know when to advance the slides, and the floor is yours.
I can still not see my presentation on your screen. Now I can actually.
Wonderful. Please go ahead.
Okay, so thank you so much. Hello, everyone. I'm here to present our work on the assessment of fish welfare during fixed net capture off the southern Portuguese coast. This work was carried out at CCMAR in the University of the Algarve under the Care Fish Catch project. Next slide, please. Yeah, perfect. So mainly 3 approaches have been taken in the past towards animal welfare based on the animal's feelings, its bodily functions, and also its inherent nature. While all of them have their own merits, the present study was carried out taking into consideration the function-based approach, the one that you can see in orange or yellow over there, since it gives us an objective way to assess welfare by measuring certain biological parameters. Next slide, please. Okay, so most studies on animal welfare in the past have focused on the welfare of domesticated animals, and the fish are often neglected. Even in terms of fish welfare, we barely find studies focusing on the welfare of wild-caught fish, and there are several reasons. Firstly, the term welfare is itself very ambiguous and difficult to measure. Then there are problems associated with comparing how fish welfare is affected by each fishing gear. There's also a lack of welfare-friendly alternatives in commercial fisheries, but there is new research being done on improving fish welfare during the process of capture, handling, and slaughter methods. And lastly, there has always been a misconception that only the farm fish are affected by poor welfare because they live under direct human manipulation, often in crowded and stressful environments. But we must also take into consideration that the wild-caught fish end their lives in extremely miserable conditions. Next slide, please. Okay, so the focus of this study was on catch welfare in gillnet fisheries. The figure that you can see on your screen shows the extent of stress and probably pain experienced by the fish throughout the fishing process, right from capture through onboard handling and then slaughter. The important stressors being physical injury, hypoxia, osmoregulatory distress, barotrauma, and desiccation. Next slide, please. So now I would like to talk a little bit about vitality assessments. So vitality is a concept which measures it is a measurement of how alive an organism is. And vitality assessments are used to measure the welfare of fish with an assumption that vitality is a function of stress. So when stimulated by a stressor, a fish responds with a cascade of neuroendocrine and physiological stress parameters or stress responses. And this eventually manifests as a behavioral response, which can be measured by a process called categorical vitality assessment that provides an ordinal index to a fish's vitality, along with taking into consideration the external or the physical injuries on that fish. Next slide. Okay, so we had mainly three research objectives. The first one was to assess the impact of bottom set gill nets on fish welfare using vitality assessments, obtaining physiological stress parameters from the targeted species, and then correlating that to vitality. And based on the first two objectives, to propose potential mitigation measures to ameliorate poor welfare in this particular fisheries. However, considering the paucity of time, I shall only disseminate the results from our first two research objectives. Next slide. Coming on to the methodology, the study was conducted off the southern Portuguese coast, that is in the Algarve. 22 fishing trips were carried out from the port of Quarteira on board two artisanal fishing vessels that operated bottom set gill nets to target demersal fish species. Next slide. Vitality assessments were done based on a specifically designed vitality scale for commonly targeted fish species by this métier. They included three species of sparids, that is Diplodocus vulgaris, Pagellus acarne, and Pagellus erythrinus, and a species belonging to family Mulidae, that is Mullus cermulatus. You can see the pictures on the screen. Ordinal vitality scores ranging from 4, indicating the most activity, to 1, indicating no activity and no responsiveness, were assigned to the individual fish that were being studied based on their activities every 2 minutes until they reached inactivity for the sparids and every minute for the mullid. Likewise, the percentage of scale loss was also recorded ordinally as a proxy for injuries, with a scale ranging from 1 indicating minimal scale loss to 4 indicating maximal scale loss. Next slide. Okay, for the physiological analysis, blood was sampled according to a specially designed sampling matrix to compare not only the physiological status of the fish at the 4 vitality stages, but also to evaluate the effect of onboard procedures that led to cumulative stress. For instance, individuals with a given vitality score at arrival on board, as indicated by the blue circles on your screen, were sampled directly either at that vitality stage or after losing vitality to any other lower score, as shown by the green, yellow, and orange circles. Fish one sample was not used for any other assessment. And also importantly, blood sampling was not performed on Mullus cermulatus, that is the mullid, since it lost vitality rapidly and most of the specimens arriving on board were non-responsive, making blood sampling highly unfeasible. 4 commonly used stress parameters, that is cortisol, glucose, lactate, and osmolality, were measured in the lab. Next slide. Now coming on to the results obtained from vitality assessments. These graphs of vitality at landing show that a majority of the sparids were landed at a vitality stage of 4, which is the most active. There's animation approximately okay, now contrary to the sparids, in case of the Mullus cermulatus individuals, they had comparatively lower vitalities than when they were hauled on board. Approximately half of them were already inactive or became inactive within the first minute, indicating that the mullids basically start losing vitality immediately upon coming into contact with the fishing gear, that is during the soak time, while the sparids do lose some vitality during the soak time, but most of it is lost when they struggle on board the fishing vessel. Next slide. These are regression analysis. So these regression analysis gave interesting insights into the loss of vitality with respect to time. As expected, Mullus thermoletus showed the most rapid loss of vitality, with the maximum time of activity on board being 5 minutes. This was followed by Pagellus acarne, Pagellus erythrinus, and lastly Diplodocus vulgaris, which had the longest time of activity, with some individuals struggling on board for more than 80 minutes before going unresponsive. This shows that all the 4 species were affected by the processes of capture and the post-capture stressors, albeit at different rates. Next slide. Okay, so generalized linear mixed models were fit to predict how various biological, technical, and environmental variables affect the duration of activity. This was done first for all the species, and then submodels were fit for individual species. This, however, shows the results from the former only. The model predictions confirmed that Mullus thermoletus had the earliest duration of loss of activity, while Diplodocus vulgaris had the longest one. Likewise, the duration of activity on board was directly proportional to the total length of the fish. This result is important and is in corroboration with past literature on escape and discard mortality, which tell us that smaller fish generally have a lower tolerance to capture and post-capture stress, and hence they die faster, or in this case, they become unresponsive faster. Next slide.
And we have 2 minutes left, Vignesh. Sorry, I know it's
Okay.
going quickly.
Yeah. Yeah, speaking of the environmental variables, both the temperatures at the depth of fishing and atmospheric temperatures negatively influence the duration of activity on board the fishing vessels. So basically, higher temperature must have led to an increase in the basal metabolic rate, and this further leads to a higher oxygen demand, which is not fulfilled in this case, and hence the loss of activity is quicker. And lastly, but interestingly, sea surface temperature, the model predicted an increase in the duration of non-responsiveness with increasing sea surface temperatures, and this result requires further scrutiny. Next slide. I believe I should get some extra time because I'm not able to share my screen. Is that possible?
We are under strict direction to stick on time, so I'm really sorry we won't be able to accommodate that, and I know
Okay.
it's frustrating.
Yeah, no worries, because I lost an awful lot of time in saying the next slide. Anyway, since we measured the stress indicators in blood, we expected the levels to rise with reducing vitality. For instance, you could go on, because this has some animations, so you could go on. For instance, Pagellus erythrinus had the highest average cortisol levels at vitality stage 1. Do you see a box over there? Okay, perfect. Yeah. So yeah, and speaking of lactate concentrations were the highest at vitality 1 for all the 3 sparrowed species. And speaking of osmolality, furthermore, high osmolality levels at vitality 1 were seen for Diplodocus vulgaris and Pagellus erythrinus. Last slide, please. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, this one. And stages 1.2 and 1.3 had the highest osmolality levels in Pagellus erythrinus, and this is an indication for. Sorry, could you go to the previous one?
Yes, and then I'm sorry, we'll have to wrap.
Okay, then I'll just conclude.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, so fish caught in wild caught fisheries end their lives in extremely stressful conditions, and all the factors to a certain extent influence the welfare of fish. For instance, over here we can see that the depth of fishing reduced the time of activity on board for Diplodocus vulgaris, but it was not very significant for the full model. And from the physiological analysis, we can say that osmolality had the largest influence on vitality. Next one, please. Next. Yeah, next one.
Okay, and then we'll finish.
Yeah, thank you so much to all the partners of the Carefish Catch Consortium, and special thanks to my supervisors and colleagues.
Thank you
to the lovely audience.
Thank you so much, Vignesh, and thank you for understanding the time constraints that we're dealing with here. We unfortunately don't have time for questions, so we'll move on to our next speaker, who is Miguel Ruano from Fish Etho Group.
So, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Miguel Juan. I would like to start. Thank you, Life Aquatic Institute, for the invitation and the opportunity to be here presenting. So I'm Miguel, and I'm part of this Carefish Catch project, which Vig, the previous presenter, is also part of. So don't worry, Vig, I'll be wrapping up your presentation as well. So, and you guys can find us on these QR codes we are gonna share throughout the presentation. So what is Catfish Catch project? We are a project part of an European consortium, several partners. And the common goal for all our partners is to assess animal welfare impacting fisheries. So we have in our team people that have knowledge on welfare in aquaculture, and for us was a little challenging to pass all these experience to the fisheries sector. So we will start by identifying some key points of welfare hazards throughout our project, to develop some fish welfare guidelines and try to analyze the economic feasibility of implementing such guidelines. Also, one of our goals is to raise public and stakeholder awareness, because it's a new topic, and implementing welfare standards into a certification program. Starting by presenting some of our partners, Fairfish, which is a Swiss organization currently responsible for developing this fish welfare database. You can find us here throughout these QR codes. Also, Fish Etho Group, which I'm representing today. We are developing some outreach publications, getting information from the research team and trying to dissect all this data, making some recs and improves for each fishery that we are assessing. Also, CCMR, the one Vig is part of, which is our research group, also sitting in Portugal, and they are conducting all the experimental trials, mostly focusing on the Southern European fisheries in Portugal, from net fishing, as Vig was explaining, throughout Pearl and Line in the Azores Islands. Also, DEMOS, which is a French institute responsible for the study of the economic feasibility of the project. And finally, Friend of the Sea, an Italian organization, our certified partner, which is aims in the end to apply some of these information we are gathering into welfare standards in some of the certified fisheries. So just to summarize, we start by testing and validating some fish welfare impact on some fishing methods. With this information, we set gear-specific improvs and recommendations on best practices. We engage with consumers and understand the economic feasibility of this topic. And finally, the idea is to implement some welfare standards into a certifying program. We work on this science-based collaborative approach, meaning that part of the project we have engaged with different kind of stakeholders. In our program, we have certifiers, NGOs, and research groups, but we engage with other stakeholders like retailers, producers, policymakers, and consumers with a common goal of reaching fish welfare, which might be translated for some of these stakeholders as a better and improvement of fish quality and product in the end. So let's start by defining welfare. I'm going to touch some issues that Vig already mentioned and also Christine, but we try to make this definition as simple as possible in the end, because we want to be able to measure it. So we might define it as the individual state as it copes with the environment, probably the simplest way to put it. There are different approaches regarding welfare in fish, as Vig mentioned as well. Not going through this now. And because we want to measure, we need some what we call it operational indicators, which might be environmental related, such as trained and competent staff. Some group-based indicators, such as behavior and health status of the individuals, and also the individual-based indicators, which would be observational aspects. We can see directly the impact on fish, such as damages or even secondary infections. So as Christine also mentioned, the welfare, from the welfare point of view in fisheries, there are these important main key moments during fishing operation that we should focus on: the capture once the fish is on board, how it's handled, and also the stunning and slaughter procedure that might be applied. Regarding our experimental trials, I'm going to pass also quickly on this. As Viv explained, we tried to find some direct indicators, in this case, such as vitality, as we've already explained. But the simplest way to explain it, we tried to create a simple scale to be able on board to assess as quick as possible by any of our team members. So we'll be from level 4 when fish gets on board, when it's still highly active, until level 1 when the fish will be dead. This was a sort of assessment we did throughout all the fisheries we've assessed, and also assess physiological status using different indicators throughout blood samples on different species and in all the fisheries we've assessed as well. So I'm going to pass net fishing because Vig already explained a lot about this. But in the end, what we want to get are some recommendations or net gear modifications. Just to summarize a little bit the vitality results we are getting. It depends on the species, of course, and what we've seen is that there are some individuals that got on board already in the levels of vitality really low. So the approach we should have, I think, would be depending on the species, on the target species. And because this is a multi-specific fishery, the approach should be much broader. So regarding also the physiological status of the individuals, these parameters show a trend that is indicative of an increasing stress throughout the time the fish is on board, as we're expecting. So one interesting fishery we were assessing was the traps and pots, which in Portugal, southern part of Portugal, will be mostly targeting the octopus. And because it's such a different species and target species, it was approached differently. So for us, the important thing regarding this fishery was the way this species is handled. And for that, we tried to approach and to assess good and bad practices. I didn't pass the slide. Oh, sorry, guys. Sorry. As I was saying, we tried to assess good and bad practices throughout the fishery. And what we've realized is that there are some bad practices such as the use of chemicals. The individuals are bleach sprayed to be easier released from traps, for example, which would be a bad practice. But for example, the use of incision that would be a sharp blow directly to the brain and the head of the individual, try to demise it as quick as possible. That would be a good practice from the welfare point of view. Although this practice in the fishery was used with a size-related sorting process, meaning that the big individuals would be bleach sprayed and the incision would be applied to all the big individuals, while the smaller individuals didn't got that luck. So, in our perspective, of course, this is a practice that should be made to all the retained catch. Now passing quickly for the purse-seining, we got some main causes of stress throughout the process, such as a higher time on the nets would be increasing the stress, the time on the overcrowding, or even the risk of distress. The use of engines and sonar devices might increase also the sensorial stress in the individuals, and sometimes the schools circle were too large, which is an additional source of stress. So, but on purse-seining, what we wanted to focus most was the use of ice, which is even controversial amongst the partners. And in this case, we simulated the different ice conditions. So we sampled individuals directly from the braille, under ice, on ice, and in ice slurry. And what we got was that the time spent in net during crowding before the catch is transferred on board has a relevant impact on vitality and physiology. For example, at time 0 and time 20, what we've seen was an increase of all the parameters that we were measuring. We also saw differences amongst species, but regarding the use of ice, what we can say is that an immediate storage cannot be seen as a stunning method per se, but at the same time, the use of ice may provide a quicker demise, avoiding prolonged pain in these individuals, and most importantly, the loss of organoleptic and nutritional features, keeping the quality of the product in the end. So just to wrap up, regarding the main recommendations we can make regarding stunning and slaughter procedures, these procedures should be performed as soon as possible once the catch is on board. The stunning tools should be really effective to ensure rendering the fish unconscious, or at least to ensure a quick demise of the fish. This should be performed by a trained personnel, and the equipment or the technique to be applied to it will depend on the target species, the fishery, and also the dimension of the vessel. Well, guys, thank you a lot for listening, and open to questions.
Thank you so much, Miguel. We actually have to keep rolling with the presentations, but hopefully the speakers will be able to stay after the session concludes and answer some other questions from the audience. Thank you so much. And I'm glad that you were able to piggyback off of Vignesh to keep the conversation going. Wonderful. So now we're handing it over to Mike Breen. And we'll just get the presentation here. And Mike is with the Institute of Marine Research in Norway. Over to you, Mike.
Thank you very much. Where's the mouse going? There we are. Right. Okay. Thank you very much for your interest in catch welfare. I'd like, and thank you for the opportunity to allow me to talk about the catch welfare platform. which is an industry science-driven platform to expedite the transition towards better catch welfare. I'm going to be speaking more specifically about our perspective on catch welfare in commercial fisheries and how we hope to improve it. So to begin with, you've heard several definitions so far. We use a functional definition of catch welfare, and that is good welfare practices are capture and handling methods that minimize the physical damage to and stress on any retained animal until after it is either slaughtered or released. By taking this approach, we aim to minimize the stress and injury in any animals in the catch. Firstly, to promote the survival of any unwanted catch that we want to release. And alternatively, any catch that's retained to improve the meat quality. And we hope that this will improve the sustainability, reputation, and productivity of the industry. As you've heard, stress responses is a perfectly natural way for an organism to protect itself and survive in the environment and cope with physical, environmental, and perceived stresses. And it happens at different biological levels, neurological, physiological, and whole animal. And in particular, we're interested in behavior, as you've seen from some of the examples already. And this is collectively referred to as stress. Now, stress is a function of the severity and exposure to a stressor. So with increasing severity, we can see an increasing response, and in terms of severity of response and prolonged response. Now, not all stress is poor welfare. Stress is a perfectly natural response. It's when that stress reaches a level at which the animal cannot cope that we have a poor welfare scenario. And when the animal reaches that level, it will drive it into a state of exhaustion. And if those stresses are not removed, it is likely to die. That is poor welfare. Now, based on this principle, based on this premise, we can conduct controlled experiments with our species of interest, and we can begin to start defining thresholds at which these poor welfare scenarios occur. And we base those measurements on contextual information of the stressor itself or the stress responses. But stress doesn't only affect the living animal. It also affects the physiology of dying and dead animals. In particular, it accelerates the decomposition process. Now, this will have inevitable effects on the quality of the meat. It drives rigor mortis, the strength, onset, and duration. It can lead to gaping, which you can see in the lower left figure there on they're macro fillets. And it can lead to soft texture in the fillet and color changes as well due to blood retention. Most interestingly, and this is something we've demonstrated quite recently in macro fillets, even after 12 months in deep freeze storage, we can still detect whether the fish was stressed or not immediately before it died. And this has direct implications on long-term storage and shelf life. And this comes back to sustainability. This comes back to reducing wastage if we can improve welfare. Now, sentience and pain. So since Lynn Snedden's pioneering work in the early 2000s, there has been strengthening support for the existence of sentience and sensitivity to pain in fish and other aquatic animals. But sensitivity to pain in fish and other aquatic animals remains a contentious issue in science. Pain, even in humans, is subjective, and so it cannot be used objectively to assess welfare status. We cannot measure it. However, if good welfare practices address the causes of stress during capture, then we will also mitigate for pain. Now, you're all familiar with this graph, and you're all probably familiar with the global catch. And as has already been pointed out by Chris, this translates to about 1.1 to 2.2 trillion animals per year, which is slaughtered in wild capture fisheries. which equates to around 90% of all production animals, including terrestrial animals. But we add to the challenges. That's one challenge of scale. The next challenge we have is that was the landed catch. Now, many of you in the room will be well aware that there are far more animals affected by the capture process than just the landed catch. We have bycatch animals, which can lead to discarding. Some animals can be released, discarded animals, and there's a huge effort has been placed, particularly in the last 50 years, in terms of trying to reduce bycatch by introducing selectivity measures, so allowing animals to escape early in the capture process. But do these animals survive? What experience they have during that escape? There's also ghost fishing, and even environmental degradation from fishing gears can affect the welfare of the animals left behind and affect their capacity to cope with future captures in the future. In addition to this, there are many, many different ways of catching fish. In fact, there's 58, the FAO defines 58 different capture types or gear types in 11 broad categories. Furthermore, the capture process is complex. It's a complex interaction between capture technology, the behavior and physiology of the fish itself, and its capacity to cope with that capture process, and the environment in which it's so it's not just basically it's not just about selecting the perfect capture method. We have to take into account the fact that the experience the animal is going to have is going to depend very much on its own capacity, the life it's had in the environment before, what energy reserves it has, and the experience it has during that capture process. So that brings us on to the Catch Welfare Platform. This is funded by the Open Philanthropy and started last year. Started last year with our opening conference, which was in Bergen, where we had 150 so delegates, including everybody here on the panel, apart from Miguel, but several of your colleagues were there as well, which we were very grateful for. But it included 50% of those delegates were from the industry. And that's our main focus. We have to have a conversation with the industry. And what we presented them with was our platform goals. The first goal is to give the industry a voice in the catch welfare conversation. And we deliberately steer away from feelings-based approaches and focus on facts, focus on measurable and empirical data about catch welfare. We also want to promote the sharing of knowledge and create realistic expectations in the consumer, in the industry, and in policymakers. And we want to create practical and profitable solutions for catch welfare, which the industry will buy into. So in doing this, we bring several different elements of the industry together: fishers, manufacturers, buyers, retailers, as well as researchers and innovators. And we're going to have four main work packages. First is characterizing the problem, which is applying risk assessments, defining practical solutions. The next is we define best practice based on that, which will include welfare indicators and operational guidelines. Then moving forward, we want to look into defining certification criteria and looking at the feasibility of traceability systems. And finally, it's about spreading the word, encouraging public discussion on catch welfare, and producing education resources, both for the industry and as well as for researchers and students. Now, these work packages are going to be populated by expert groups or members from expert groups, members from expert groups from the industry, as well as from the scientific community. And To make this work tangible, we're going to be focusing on case studies. The case studies haven't been decided yet. We're going to be working on that next month, actually. These are some of the candidates we're looking at. And these are going to be taken from work that we know has already been done or is currently underway, which is looking at catch welfare related issues. I'm going to be bringing that empirical evidence into the discussion and presenting it to the industry and seeing if we can come up with practical solutions. And one way we approach this is by conducting a pathway analysis, as Chris pointed out. And that can be used to identify critical areas during the capture process, which we use to prioritize research objectives and help define informative and practical welfare indicators. And these, we hope, with the projects which are going to be linked with the platform, are going to be confirmed with empirical observations, linking indicators with welfare-related impacts, both in terms of vitality, survival, and quality. So, what we aim for is the potential solutions we see coming out of this are firstly developing science-based advice for decision makers. We want to continue the development of welfare monitoring methods and technologies. We want to map impacts in all the major fisheries. It's an ambitious goal, but we want to start somewhere. And we want to develop practical and cost-effective good welfare in the industry. We also want to incentivize the stakeholder, demonstrate the link between welfare and sustainability, product quality, and shelf life. And we want to valorize good welfare practices with certification schemes. And finally, as Chris pointed out, there are solutions already can be applied. We can limit catch size. There are ways of doing that now. There are technologies to do that. We can avoid unwanted catches. We can improve gear selectivity and allow that unwanted catch to escape early in the capture process, where the stress it experiences is less. We can modify handling practices at the surface. Thank you. And we can apply stunning methods before slaughter, so that the pre-slaughter stress is reduced and so has less impact on quality. So thank you very much for listening. It's greatly appreciated. And can I have that plug? If you are interested in this, there's a call for abstracts now for the welfare conscious and sustainable fishing in the 21st century at the IC's annual science conference in September. 2 weeks ago, just over 2 weeks ago, if you want to get your abstract in. So I look forward to receiving them. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mike. Lots of fascinating work and research shared there. And here's another event that we're going to have to somehow make our way to this later on this year. Thank you. So we're going to move on to our second virtual speaker. We have Kanai Tokunaga. She is with the Gulf of Marine Research Institute, and we will see if she can pull up her presentation on the screen. Otherwise, we will be able to do that from this terminal.
All right, good afternoon. How am I sharing the screen?
Yep.
All right, great. Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to present this work. So today I'm going to share some findings from our economic studies about that evaluated consumers' willingness to pay for whale-safe technology. So just as a background, so I'm based in Portland, Maine, in the United States, and there we are against a huge challenge where we're seeing a decline of North Atlantic right whale. It's one of the most endangered large whale species in the world, and this is impacting the operation of a lobster fishery in Maine. And fishing gear entanglement is considered one of the causes of whale mortality. And the challenge really is that since 1997, Maine's lobster industry has been implemented whale safe measures using things such as weak links and sinking lines. But very recently in February, one right whale was found dead with Maine lobster gear. So we're really facing this huge challenge. And just before going to the details of the study, I wanted to share how the lobsters are caught in Maine. So first of all, the main lobsters are, this is the American lobster species. It's caught by traps that are placed on the seafloor, and then the traps are connected to the surface buoy with vertical line. And whales are, there's a risk that the whales get entangled in this vertical line. To reduce the risk to whales, there are currently on-demand or ropeless traps that are being developed. And these technology removes the vertical line, and by raising the traps to the surface using the remote control mechanism. And there are also other technologies being investigated and developed to reduce whale mortality risks, but our study really focused on this ropeless trap technology. While this technology has a lot, is promising in terms of reducing risks to whales, it also has a lot of challenges. And especially when it comes to cost, it's 20 times more expensive than conventional trap gears. And given that Maine's fishery, lobster fishery is owner-operated, family-run businesses with more than 5,500 independent harvesters that are, and this costliness is gonna put, if they are required to make the switch, many of these businesses will be put out of business. Another challenge is that in addition to the cost of the actual ropeless fishing gear, it takes more time to operate, so might not be suitable for those who are operating alone on the vessel. Another thing is that Maine's fishing ground is really densely trapped. So technologically, there's a lot of challenge thinking about how it's going to be, how that can be used actually by the industry in this fishery. So our question in our study was to see if consumers would be able to pitch in to share the burden of this to reduce the risks to whales. And we conducted online survey-based choice experiment back in July 2021. And so basically, for those who are not familiar with choice experiment is a method used often by economists to understand a consumer's willingness to pay for different attributes that a product different product attributes. So in our study, what we measured was we presented this question and asked the consumers to select which one they are willing to purchase. And so, for example, I'm showing the example here, the options for lobster rolls, one caught in Canada using fixed trap or conventional gear. And other option is lobster rolls made with lobsters caught in Maine using ropeless fishing gear. And then by presenting, and then those, as you can see, have different prices. And by asking this type of questions, we are able to estimate the marginal willingness to pay for lobster, the ropeless gear. So here's the research question. So our main research question, again, is to understand U.S. consumers' willingness to pay for lobsters harvested by ropeless traps. But we also are interested in understanding whether, whether we could use information information treatment to nudge consumers to pay more. So we tested 3 information treatments. And by information treatment, what we mean by that is that we part of the consumer panel saw the information about that highlighted the risk of whale extinction, showing exact numbers of whale populations and how they're endangered. Another group was shown the information that highlighted the animal welfare concern associated with the lobster gear entanglement. So when whales are entangled in lobster gears, they suffer many months with pains and they get debilitated before they eventually die. So this information treatment highlighted that animal welfare concern. And we also included an information treatment that mentioned the fact that Maine lobster gear's contribution to the right whale mortality is uncertain, just because when we ran this survey, the Maine lobster gear has not been associated with any of the whale mortality. So we also included this information treatment. We were also interested, we are also interested in understanding how different consumer attributes, such as their knowledge level about this issue, as well as their attitudes or the worldviews associated with whether they had a pro-environmental worldview or not, and whether and we also examined the cultural worldviews that are found to be associated with the consumer's willingness to pay for new food production technologies. So we included these questions. We also examined other types of consumer attributes, including pro-animal welfare attitudes and demographics. I'm gonna shift to talking about our results. Today I'm just going to be able to mention a few of these consumer attributes: prior knowledge, ecological worldviews, and cultural worldviews. But I'd be happy to answer questions later, or if you can reach out to me, I'd be happy to share more. Just a little bit about survey design. So just as I mentioned, we did the survey to the over 2,000 US consumers, and this sample was split into 4 groups, and each group seeing different types of information. And we ran a choice experiment, and we also asked information about their attitudes, worldviews, prior knowledge, and demographics. I mentioned that we asked about their ecological and cultural worldviews. And in the survey, we included some of the established metrics to evaluate these worldviews. So for the ecological worldviews, we asked questions or metrics that is called new ecological paradigm that is often used to measure pro-environmental attitudes by asking questions related to anti-anthropocentrism, anti-exemptionalism, balance, eco-crisis, and limits. And for cultural worldviews, we use the abbreviated version of the questions to measure their preferences for individualism versus communitarianism, and preference for hierarchical versus egalitarian preference. What we found, so just to give some descriptive statistics, we found that the majority of the consumers indicate of having pro-environmental attitudes based on their answers to the ecological worldview questions. And in terms of the cultural worldview questions, we found that higher percentage of the consumers have egalitarian and communitarian preferences. So the results, jumping into results. So overall, what we found interesting really was that the animal welfare concern information, so it's the information treatment that highlighted the animal welfare concern, was most effective at influencing consumers' willingness to pay for lobster harvested using ropeless gear. The group who were shown this information paid $3.42 more than the control group. And consumers with higher or pro-environmental attitude scores were found to pay $2.75 more and $5.54 more when they're shown information about extinction risk and animal welfare concern information. Consumers with a strong animal welfare preference were found to pay $4.64 more when they were shown animal welfare concern information. But interestingly, those who expressed to have low pro-environmental attitudes or weak animal welfare preference, none of the treatment effects had significant they were found to have insignificant or their marginal willingness to pay for the lobsters harvested by ropeless gear were found to be insignificant. And
Sorry, Kenny, we have 2 minutes left.
sure.
Thank you.
And almost done. The consumers with higher knowledge were found to pay $5.48 more for lobsters harvested by ropeless gear. But when they were shown information about the uncertainty over the main contributions to the whale mortality, consumers with prior knowledge were found to pay $11.23 less than the control group. It's kind of interesting findings. So we wanted to explore more about how all of these fit together to shape the consumers' preferences for the seafood, or in this case, lobster caught in a whale-safe manner. We found that after doing the latent class analysis, we did not find that the latent preference did not yield statistically significant difference, which we thought was interesting. But prior knowledge seems to have be playing some important role here. So we're still exploring this, but really understanding how different worldviews mean for the prior knowledge about this issue, and then how that shapes the willingness to pay for the ropeless lobsters. So in summary, consumers respond more to information about animal welfare concerns, even compared against the extinction risk. Animal welfare concerns seems to have nudged consumers to pay more. I think it's an important finding. And additional information on extinction risk and animal welfare concerns work towards consumers with stronger pro-environmental or stronger pro-animal welfare attitudes, but that wasn't the case for those who didn't seem to have high preferences for pro-environmental or the animal welfare concerns. And that's it. Thank you so much.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Really fascinating research and findings. Thank you for sharing them with us. And certainly whales have the advantage of being those charismatic megafauna that really help elicit a lot of emotional reaction in the general public. So yeah, really interested to learn more about that. Thank you everyone for sticking with us. We have arrived at our final speaker of this session. And certainly not least, we have Klaus Sparvon. He's the head scientist at the Danish Pelagic Producer Organization.
Yes. Thank you. And I am aware that I'm the only thing that stands behind you and some refreshing white wine. So that's a little unfortunate because I have a very long presentation. which is going to be even longer because I can't see the mouse here. Yeah. You had the same problem? Yeah. There you go. There it is. What's your presentation? The one, spot one there. That one. Yes. Okay. What I'm gonna talk about today is a project that we have done. It's a collaboration between an industry partner, a scientific organization, and a NGO collaboration. It's on fish welfare in a herring trawl fishery, a large pelagic herring trawl fishery. And before I start the presentation, I'd like to highlight some of my co-authors, especially Mafalda Thomas, who did her master thesis on the project here. So it's basically her results that I'm going to show you, and her supervisor, Albin Krantz. My name is Claus Sparbo, as was mentioned, and I'm the Chief Science Officer for the Danish Pelagic Producer Organization. And that is basically the pelagic fishing industry in Denmark. It's an industry which catching a lot of small pelagic fish, as you can see down on the donut slide there, mainly herring and mackerel. We have 11 members in our organization, and in total we catch around 350,000 tons of fish per year, these 11 vessels. The two vessels you see on the slide on the left-hand side is just showing that when I started in my position 10 years ago, the one furthest to the left was the biggest vessel, or furthest to the right, maybe, the biggest vessel in our organization. And here 10 years after, it has been replaced by an even more bigger one and even more modern one. So it's just to show that it's really a modern fishery, which are relying on new technologies and so on. You might ask yourself why we are engaging in a project on fish welfare. And one of the reasons for that is that we were approached by our NGO partner in the project, Nikolaj Lindeborg, who works from the Animal Protection Denmark. And when he started to work as a fish consultant, he did a calculation where he looked into how many fish were going to be influenced by Danish society, he called it. But he actually did a calculation seeing how many fish did live in aquarium in Denmark, how many were being caught by recreational fisheries, and how many were being caught by the commercial fishery. And as you can see, the commercial fishery were the one that really stood out, and that's especially the pelagic fishery, where a large number of is being caught every year, around 30 billion fish. So he approached us and asked whether we should see if we could look into the catch welfare of these fish when they die, what kind of stress level they have, and ultimately if there were anything we could do to improve things for this large number of fish. And in our organizations, we're not afraid of engaging in scientific projects, so we also jumped on this project here, and I think it has been very fruitful. It should also be mentioned that Nikolaj, he did approach us in a very constructive way, so he didn't dare. So we set out a research project with this vessel here, Beinur, and it is fishing for herring in these 2 trips. It should be mentioned that doing scientific experiments on board these very large vessels is really a logistic task, because you never know when they're in harbor, you never know when they go out again, and sometimes they're even switching for fishing one species to another species without any notice. So we managed only to sample from 2 trips, and in total that was 5 hauls. So we are in the start of sort of examining this fishery here. And it also should be mentioned, as you saw on one of the first slides, that we do catch a wide variety of fish and in all kinds of seasons. So this experiment here is very restricted to this herring fishery in these 2 trips here. Also want to mention that we did some reference fish which we caught with a hook and line on a commercial cutter, what they call a fish boat in the Sound of Denmark. So it's not really true that it's reference fish, but at least we had the impression that they would probably have been under, at least in a shorter period of stress, because they were hooked and then sampled directly. The project was financed by Open Philanthropy. Before I go into the results, I just want to show what pelagic fishery is. I think it's a little important to have a sort of kind of understanding on the fishery and what happens to the fish during the catching process. What's important in pelagic fishery is what the skipper Carsten here is doing in the wheelhouse, and that is to checking his acoustic equipment. Because what you're doing is that you are identifying a school of fish, and then you are targeting that school, which you can see on the other slide. So it's a relatively fast operation where you sort of, after have detected the schools, launch your gear, and then you catch the schools, and then you pump it on board. I think we also already seen some slides on pumping, but I just wanna show a few slides of it. So you should imagine that the school has been caught in the trawl, and now it's being dragged towards the boat. And when it comes to the boat, then the cod end is being equipped with this pumping equipment, and from that pumping equipment, all the fish are being pumped onto the vessel. And that is what you can see here. Oh, sorry. Yeah, there's just an example of what happens when the fish are being pumped on board. So you can see it's quite massive. It's a lot of fish at the same time. And it's a large operation. Anyway, this is where we sampled the fish in our experiment. So what happened prior to the sort of pumping, we don't really know. We don't know what happened prior to we sampled them here. We don't even know what happened during the pumping anyway. Okay. Mafalda and Albin then sampled the fish at the pumping station, or this fish water separator, and did some morphological indications. We simply x-rayed the fish to see if there were any external wounds or internal wounds. As you can see on the left-hand side, there's only 5% of them showed any signs of physical wounds. However, our assessment of consciousness, which was the typical, we were putting them back into water to see if they were trying to swim or whether they were trying to ventilate and stuff like that, showed that in our experiment here, 96% of the fish were already dead or was classified as being dead or unconscious at the time of the after the pumping when they reached the vessel there. We also found a very high degree of scale loss. Actually, the individual scale loss was around 95%. And that is due to that fish, herring, are very sensitive to losing their scales. For example, the scale in the reference was also 63%. We found a high degree of blood cell rupture in a lot of our fish. And by blood cell rupture, I meant that the hemolysis had started. So this sort of the blood cell was starting to dissolve. And that might be or might not be related to this scale loss. We at least have some indications of that. And we found it interesting because this blood cell rupture has also been connected to the quality of the fillet of the fish. So it's quite clear that there's an option there to increase the quality of the fish. I now have some of the slides of the physiology measurements we did. I think we have seen quite a lot of them already. This one here is on osmolality. And what we are doing here is we are comparing the osmolality to the trawling time. But as you remember, we only had 5 hauls, and two of the hauls had the same trawling time, so we have a limited number of observation. But at least you could see that the one with the lowest trawling time was also the one where we had the lowest osmolality. The red line in the bottom is the control fish. So that was the one that was caught with hook and line. So anyway, you can see for all cases, the trawling fish did show higher degree of this stress indicator. And this is also the case for lactate and cortisol, which we also measured. And similar to before, we have a limited number of halts. And actually, if you look on the lactate, the 3 lowest is for one trip and the 2 highest is for another trip. So there's also a little bit of pseudo replication in this experiment here. But anyway, there is some indication at least that it's much higher than it is for the reference fish. So we're getting closer to some white wine. Anyway, I'm going to the conclusions. We found that we had few fish alive. I think that was a bit of a surprise because normally, and when you talk to other fishermen, they are claiming and saying that there is a lot of herring alive when it enters the vessels. And at least for mackerel, we also know that it's typically alive when it enters. But anyway, that's could be due to many things, the season, the depth they were caught on, the pumping system they're using, and so on. It's also difficult from this experiment here to really determine when the fish die. Is it during the trawling or is it during the pumping? For all stress indicators, they were high compared to our reference fish, and we had a high degree of rupture of blood cell, this hemolysis, which we also would like to look into in more details, especially as it is connected to the quality of the fish. And then finally, a little bit of a disclaimer saying that it's a limited number of halt trips that we examined, and therefore you should be a little careful of extrapolating it to other herring fisheries and especially to other pelagic fisheries because they do differ quite a lot in the way they're carried out. Thank you. Oh.
Thank you so much, Klaus. I always love hearing kind of what is that aha moment for people when they start to think fish sentience. This is something I haven't thought of. I had that same experience 3.5 years ago, which totally changed the trajectory of my career. Okay, great. I think we have time for one question from the audience, and then we'll thank our wonderful panelists and wrap. And then maybe if you have additional questions, you'll be able to approach them afterwards. Is there anything that is on people's mind that you'd like to ask at this time? Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. I have a question in mind. Have you considered or have you engaged the Marine Stewardship Council to put all this, the good work that you're doing in their fishery standards? Thank you.
Excellent question. Thank you. Yes, we have. And it's not in their current projected timeline to consider welfare as part of their certification scheme. But there are other certification groups who are certainly considering it. But it's with the MSC, it's such a huge process to add something in addition to their current certification. But yes, you're quite right. So they were one of the first we approached.
Wonderful, thank you. If you could please join me in another round of applause for our panelists. Very, very well deserved, a really fascinating conversation that we had this afternoon. Thank you to our virtual panelists who joined us and put up with some tech challenges. There's always something that's going to pop up, but I'm really thrilled with how this session went. And again, thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of the conference.
You could have been in a smaller room.
Exactly. Yeah.